We're coming to the business end of this referendum. For us, it's been a 6-week campaign. But for Auntie Pat Anderson, this referendum is something she's been working towards for years.
The journey has been an emotional roller coaster. Since we left Uluru in 2017, we have spent a lot of time trying to educate. I feel like I've spent my whole life in that trench, like a whole lot of us, educating, cajoling, explaining to non-Aboriginal people why we're doing this, why we're saying that, why we need this, and so on.
That's Auntie Pat Anderson. She was there at Uluru in 2017. In fact, it was Auntie Pat Anderson who sent out letters inviting Indigenous Australians to the constitutional dialogues that led to this vote. Hi, I'm Carly Williams. I'm a Kundamukka woman and the National Indigenous Correspondent at the ABC.
And I'm Fran Kelly, joining you from Gadigal land of the Eora Nation in Sydney. And this is the Voice Referendum Explained.
This is about doing things with Indigenous Australians rather than either to them or for them.
This campaign is entirely about whether we want a country divided or united.
So with the referendum just days away now, we thought it was a good time to recap what you need to know before you vote. We promised at the start of this podcast that we would cover the facts, not the fights. But the fact is, the levels of rancor and misinformation and disinformation we've seen has been like nothing before we've seen in a vote of this kind in Australia. So we're going to take a look in this episode at the main arguments from the yes and the no camps and where we are at in these final days. But first, let's start with the basics.
Well, first things first, when you get to that ballot box on referendum day, you will be asked one question. Now, that question is a proposed law to alter the Constitution to recognise Australia's First People by establishing an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice. Do you approve of this alteration? That's a question.
That's the question. That's the question that'll be on your ballot paper. There's one box, and in that box, Carly, what are we writing?
Yes or no, that's it.
That's it, yes or no. And Carly, just to remind people again too, there's one question, but there are two elements to it, right?
The first is constitutional recognition. At the moment, First Nations mob are not mentioned at all in the Constitution. The Yes campaign says we need to tell the whole story of Australia in that document, which is effectively the rule book of our nation.
Yeah, that's what our Constitution is, right? The way Noel Pearson puts it about all this is that this is the chance as a country, quoting him here, for inclusion and constitutional recognition would structure a process of listening and learning to deal with entrenched disadvantage. And that brings us to the second element of this constitutional change we're going to be voting on, the voice.
So it's not just symbolic recognition in the Constitution, it has a practical element, which is the voice, an advisory body. It won't fund programs, it gives advice, and that advice can be ignored by Parliament.
Yeah, and that gets written specifically into the Constitution if we vote yes. It'll say, quote, "The Parliament shall have power to make laws with respect to matters relating to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice, including its composition, its functions, its powers and its procedures."
Okay, that's clear. So let's go through the yes arguments first. Their main pitch is that when mob have a say in decisions that affect them, we get better outcomes.
We're here to draw a line in the sand and say this has to change, people's lives have to improve. And we know from the evidence that what improves people's lives is when they get a say.
That's Professor Marcia Langton. And those campaigning for yes argue that something needs to be done to help entrenched disadvantage that many mob face. They say if nothing changes, then we're living in the no.
We already live in no. We're already here in no. No is now. So I'd rather work towards something different, something like a incremental change that, if I thought yes was the finish line, I wouldn't be about it, but I don't think it's the finish line. I think there's going to be work to do on the 15th, yes or no. So let's go.
So that's Yorta Yorta rapper Briggs, and he put out a viral ad that basically broke it down and said, well, if you don't know, maybe you should look it up.
Look it up.
Have you Googled it? The voice, the proposal, the referendum. Have you Googled it?
You know what? I have not had heaps of time. Just
busy.
Yeah. Pretty much.
Life.
Yeah.
Have you got your phone?
Yeah.
Can I see it? I'll help you out.
Oh.
Let's see what you do have time for.
Yeah, and that video has been seen by millions and millions of people. The Yes campaign, people like Pat Anderson, who we heard from at the start of this ep, like to remind everyone that constitutional recognition with a voice, so those two elements, was actually a direct request that came from First Nations people.
People forget that, but this came from us. It came from First Nations people, first peoples of this continent. So we felt that we'd done a very extensive job. The dialogues are full of tears and pain and anger, distress. But in the end, the delegates at Uluru, I remember that day very well. Everybody stood and clapped and cheered, and lots of hugs and what have you. So we felt we had done a really good job. We were confident.
And with just days to go, Pat Anderson is still campaigning and is still talking about what a yes will look like.
When we get a yes, it's a whole new relationship, a whole different way of doing business. We will be included finally in the life of the nation, and we will be able to sit down at the table, metaphorically, with the government and the executive of the day and be part of the decisions and policies that are made about us. This will be totally new. So it will be absolutely, as the play says, a brand new day.
But of course, Fran, not everybody is voting yes, and not every Indigenous Australian is voting yes. There are Indigenous Australians leading the no arguments. Now, there are two different no sides. They have different visions, different arguments, and different values. There's the progressive no, and then there's the conservative no, led by the opposition. Senator Karen Little is an Aranda woman. She's a leading no campaigner in the opposition, which argues this referendum is constitutionally risky.
We heard from a range of different silks who are academics and experts themselves in constitutional law, as well as some former judges of the High Court. What was true about that was there wasn't agreement on the risk. The only agreement was the risk wasn't quantifiable. When we finished that process, it was really clear there was absolutely no compromise on doing anything that would reduce concerns that were raised over risk.
But Carly, on that risk thing, over the last 6 weeks there's been a long list of constitutional experts, and including two former High Court judges, who are saying that the voice is not risky in itself. And in fact, they say that the notion of a High Court challenge, even if there is one, that's what the High Court is there for. It deals with challenges like this all the time. That's their argument.
Yes, but Senator Karen Little was on the parliamentary committee that looked at the legislation that set up the referendum, and she believes any level of risk is a concern for our democracy.
It's true, when you get a bunch of lawyers in a room, they don't agree. And I think the fact that there was disagreement means that we should be, as Australians always have, considering this very carefully. This is not just about constitutional recognition. This is about a body called voice, which is not even defined in the question we're being asked, or even the chapter itself.
And when I spoke to Senator Little for this podcast, the risk thing wasn't her only issue with the voice. She's also concerned about how much it will achieve and also the financial cost of all of this process. She also says she's hearing from other Indigenous Australians who share her concerns.
I hear every day from people who are living in remote areas, are living in difficult circumstances, who say this voice is not for me. I actually got some communication last night. These people sent me from the Riverland a video of them saying no. I just think this notion that Aboriginal people all think the same, or that we all support the voice, is quite frankly a nonsense. That's not what people are telling me. Sure, there are people that support it, but there is a body of people that are just saying absolutely no, and for a range of reasons.
Another big argument from the no side is the lack of detail, Fran.
Yeah, and it's true. There is no agreed model here for the voice. The PM didn't want that detail to be in the question because the truth is it's hard enough to get a referendum change up in this country without getting bogged down in detail. You know, the saying goes, if you're explaining, you're losing. That's what the campaigners say. And the Constitution itself, too, is perhaps not really the place for detailed policy because it's where the big ideas are listed. After all, the Constitution was written more than 100 years ago now. Life and society are very different now.
But the lack of detail has become a huge concern in the community about the voice, who will lead it, who will be on it, how will they be selected, what will they do. What we do know, Fran, is that it will be representative of mob. First Nations people will choose people who will sit on this advisory body. There'll be a gender balance and then Parliament can tweak the way that the voice looks if it gets up.
Yeah, and there'll be local and regional voices too. That's important. The Prime Minister says that if the country does vote yes, then there'll be a joint parliamentary process, so a joint select committee, to oversee the legislation that would create the voice and its powers and its functions, as it says in that change to the Constitution.
As we get creeping closer to referendum day, Fran, the opposition's big argument that I'm hearing every day is that a voice to Parliament will split the country.
Do we divide our country along the lines of race within our nation's rule book? Do we divide our country within our constitution? It is wrong to suggest we have not had a voice.
So a lot of people who are voting against the voice are saying, why do we get something in the Constitution for one group that singles them out and that other groups don't get it? I've been hearing that a lot.
Yeah. Pat Anderson is not really impressed with that argument.
I get quite offended that some people are saying that if you vote yes, you're going to divide the nation on race. Well, I'm sorry, folks, Australia has always been divided on race.
So as we mentioned before, Indigenous mob aren't in the Constitution at the moment, but Fran, race is. Professor George Williams is a constitutional lawyer and he was on the federal government's constitutional expert panel, which provided advice on the referendum question.
The Constitution does reference race. So in a couple of areas, it says that it contemplates that state parliaments can prevent people voting because of their race. I don't know any constitution in the world that still has a clause like that. Of course, it's not used, fortunately, but it's still there. And then there's the races power, which lets the federal parliament make laws for the people of any race. And that's there directed at races primarily back in 1901 for racist purposes, to prevent certain races from having jobs in areas or living in areas. But they're directed to people based upon race. They're still in the Constitution, but they don't specifically reference Indigenous peoples in any way.
Yeah, and in 2007, John Howard, you remember, Carly, controversially used that race power to put in place what was called the Northern Territory Intervention. That was a set of policies imposed on Indigenous communities in the NT in response to the Little Children Are Sacred report into neglect and sexual abuse of Aboriginal children. The intervention included welfare quarantining, alcohol bans in communities, and sending the army and more police into communities too to stop the levels of abuse and violence.
But back to this referendum debate, Fran, let's talk about the progressive black no side. Their arguments are anything but the voice is too risky.
Yeah, they say it's just not enough, right?
They say it's not powerful enough. Independent Senator Lydia Thorpe heads up the Black Sovereign movement, and she says this constitutional offering is just scraps from the table.
They want to feel good about the referendum. The referendum to assimilate our people into their constitution.
I think all sides of the debate, Fran, do agree that this campaign, the toxicity, has really hurt First Nations people. Last episode, we heard from Marge Anderson, who runs an Indigenous helpline, 13 Yarn. They have been bombarded with calls and almost overwhelmed by people ringing up, sharing their experiences.
Yeah, because there's a lot of racism and vitriol on social media, isn't there?
there sure is. Senator Lydia Thorpe was named in a video where a neo-Nazi white supremacist was burning an Aboriginal flag, and he used her name in that video. She's accused the police, the federal police, and the PM of not doing enough to protect her.
You want to paint me as an angry black woman? Well, you are about to see an angry black woman, because I am not hiding this time. I've been in exile for 4 months. 4 months I wasn't allowed to be in my own home because people want to kill me out there.
That is scary. That is real. And Senator Lydia Thorpe isn't the only Indigenous MP who's had to increase security right now. It is toxic out there. Indigenous mob are copping it.
Yeah, and that's going to be something to be dealt with after Referendum Day, isn't it, for sure? Referendum Day is almost here. And, Carly, I think if we go to what's going to happen on the night now, I think we're going to know the result of this pretty quickly. I think so.
How soon?
Well, I'm not sure exactly, but the fact is, there's not any preferences or anything like that to be counted like an election. There's just the yes or the no on the ballot paper, which makes things a lot easier, right? And all of the pre-poll votes will be counted on the night too. There's more than well over 2 million of those come in already, so that should make it a quicker process. But wherever it lands, Carly, I'm here to tell you that the ABC's election analyst, Anthony Green, will be there to help you keep across the numbers.
Malcolm Fraser in 1975 won an election with 56% of the two-party preferred vote. That was a landslide. We're seeing the no case at levels above that. So if that's what the referendum's going to produce, it will be very clear very quickly.
In other words, if the polls are right, it'll be all over very quickly. If the polls are wrong, settle in for the long count.
And remembering we need a double majority to change the Constitution. So we need to be watching how the whole country is voting, but you also need to keep an eye on the states. So 4 out of the 6 states need to have a majority yes for this referendum, the voice to Parliament, to get over the line.
Yeah, if 3 states vote no, it's all over. And as both sides make their final pitch in these last days, they're also now looking to life beyond the vote. Karen Little says there's nothing to fear from no.
What I want to say post the referendum, which unfortunately is a win or lose proposition, I think we all lose given the polling that's proposed at the moment, but let's see what happens on referendum day. But I think what's really important for people to understand is it won't be a magical fix and it won't be a magical change regardless of the result. But what we do have to do is stop this government from denying us to have those inquiries that are looking at the organisations right now where there are clearly some issues that need exploring, and let us do that work so that we can get the change.
And those like Arnie Pat Anderson, who have been with this campaign since the beginning, really, they are really urging Australians to please make sure you're informed before you head to the ballot box on referendum day.
There's only you and your conscience. So when you go into that little space, make an informed decision, whichever way you vote. Vote yes, or you can vote no. But take responsibility for that vote. This is a really important time for our nation, not just for blackfellas, it's for the whole nation. There's a time of reflection here. It's a transformative time. It's a time for us to reflect upon who we are, what do we stand for, and what are our values as a nation. It's crunch time, folks.
It's crunch time, Carly. And this is our final episode. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. If you've got friends or families who are still a bit confused or want to know more detail before they vote about this whole thing, send them our way to the Voice Referendum Explained podcast. You can find it on the ABC Listen app and on iView.
There's still plenty of coverage to come right up until referendum day. On referendum day, News Radio will be broadcasting from 6 p.m. with Dana Morse and Tom Oriti. We will be back on the Sunday with Sam Hawley doing the ABC Daily News podcast.
We sure will. And of course, ABC TV will have full coverage too. And a big shout out to our producer of this podcast, Madeline Jenner, for her great ideas, her hard work and her just general all-round brilliance, wouldn't you say?
Love you, Mads. Thank you.
Love you, Mads. The video version is edited by Murray Adam and Richie Pappas, and the camera work by Adam Wyatt and Jeff Kemp. Our theme music has been composed by Erin Campbell. For one last time, see you, Carly.
See you, Fran.